Now we're going to talk about the 3-act structure, which is in every good film that you'll see. The first act is the setup. This is where you catch the audience's attention. You tell them the vital information needed to get the story started. Main characters, the problem, the location, the genre, the story, the catalyst, all that stuff is involved in the first act. For example, a chase scene at the beginning where a detective is going after a bad guy. You draw the audience in with an action scene, and you're also showing the audience the main character's skill set of what he does and how good he is at doing that. From there, you introduce them to several characters that are going to be around the audience, that are main characters in the movie. At the end of Act 1, you want to create your problem. Ultimately, this is where your push, goal, and central question are raised from. Your problem directly affects your main character and gives him a reason to push forward, go towards the goal, and ultimately answer that central question at the very end of the movie. The 3 main points you want to reveal to your audience in Act 1 is the push, the goal, and the central question. The main character's push is the reason why he's doing what he's doing in your movie. Is it to save his family, to save the town, to prove to everyone else that he can do this? You have to have a push, something that pushes the character along through the movie. The push is also directly related to motivation, which we'll talk a little more about in the character development section. Your goal. What is the character trying to achieve in relation to the push or the motivation? So in other words, if your character's push or motivation is to save his family, what does he need to do in order to save his family? And finally, your central question. This is simply, is he going to save his family? You want to create doubt in the audience's mind. The more the character has to overcome, the greater your story is. Ultimately, you'll answer the central question at the end of the movie in the climax. So at the end of Act 1, you create your problem, and this is where you get your push, goal, and central question from. The best problems in a movie are ones that your main character has no control over, but ultimately he must make a decision, which drives your push, your goal, and your central question. At the end of Act 1, before transitioning into Act 2, you want to create that turning point, which is derived from your problem. It's a twist that's entered into the movie that propels your audience into Act 2. When you start Act 1, you want to think about subplots. Subplots add dimension to your film. They intersect and they push the plot forward, the main plot forward. So you should have at least 1 to 6 subplots in your movie. So if the main plot is the detective has to save the town from the bad guys, a subplot could be the love interest that he finds along the way, some integrity that he learns, maybe he gets greedy, some vulnerability, some goals, some dreams that he had before that he had to give up because he was a detective. These are all subplots that help build your character up and push your movie forward and bring your audience in. Subplots are very intricate, and most films fail at subplots because they confuse the audience. It diverts them from the main plot, and it confuses the audience into thinking that that is the real plot of the movie when it's just a subplot and it's supposed to build the character up. Make sure you don't make that mistake. Act 2. This is the development area. This is where the story begins to develop and take shape. It's tricky because you could lose your audience at this point too with too slow of a development. All right? Remember, action moves the story forward. Most people fail at this when writing a script. Momentum is what you need. One scene develops into the next. You need action points, which are dramatic events that cause a reaction from your main character. So some action points might be a barrier, where it stops the action and moves into a new direction. Or a complication, something that happens to make the goal more difficult. Instead of saving the town, now maybe he has to save the world. Or reversal, which is my personal favorite. It takes the audience in a whole new direction. Those movies that you see that have a nice twist to them, those reversals. You think something's going to happen this way, and the filmmaker takes you another direction that way. When developing Act 2, as long as there is actions and responses that are related to your storyline, your script will continue to move forward. We're going to touch more about this on character development. The motivation and action of your character that pushes him towards that end goal is going to help you move forward through Act 2. That's a very pivotal part, and we're going to relate to that a little bit later. But now we'll move on to creating the scene. Every movie is comprised of just small scenes that make up an entire movie. So when creating your scene, here's a couple things to think about. Must have a reason for being in the story. Make sure your scene has a reason for being in the story. It reveals part of your character. Make sure it advances your story along. It explores a theme, and it builds an image Add action to static scenes in order to capture your audience. Sometimes it's better to show rather than to just talk about stuff. You can do that through a montage if you like. And then from what point of view are you telling the story from? These are all important parts when creating and writing your scene. And finally, Act 3, the resolution. This is where it all comes together. Your foreshadowing, everything pays off. Your character traits, stuff that he's learned along the way, all pay off. Objects and certain actions you've had earlier in the movie, all pay off now. This is also where you wrap up all your subplots, stuff that he's learned, love interests, small stories, you wrap them all up. And then finally, all your questions are answered in the climactic event. Does he save the town or does he lose? If you've developed a great story up until this point, you'll have your audience on the edge of their seat.